Moon Jae-in government's policy. This is an official policy as announced by the government. The whole catchphrase is peaceful and prosperous Korean Peninsula. And strategy 1, strong national security and responsible. Responsible is the word, I think, defense. Strategy 2, South-North Korean reconciliation and cooperation and denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Number 3 is proud diplomacy leading international cooperation. It's pretty, I think, plain. So actually, he is following up very diligently. So President Moon, in his paratrooper Beremo, he served in the military, and he served as a paratrooper, and he's very proud of it. And second picture, of course, is very famous picture of our president and North Korean leader hugging. And bottom left is a French president and our president. Middle, Indian Prime Minister, our president. And the bottom right, Indonesian president and our president. So he traveled to Europe, he traveled to Asia, he traveled to United States, China, and Russia. And he didn't travel to Middle East or Africa, except United Arab Emirates. He didn't travel to Latin America. And that's the pattern we have, because Korea, we have such a big problem with North Korea. We have such big issues with all our neighbors. So we have to, usually presidents spend first 2 years working on those problems. And perhaps after third year, he's traveling to Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. That's usually what happens. And that really shows how, what kind of geopolitical position Korea is in. And Moon Jae-in government's policy is more, so they are going to do the early transfer of wartime operational control. And that's an important issue from the Nomuhyun government 10 years ago. And conclusion of an inter-Korean basic agreement, and drawing a new economic map on the Korean Peninsula, and building a responsible Northeast Asia Plus community. I just want to say about the third point, drawing a new economic map on the Korean Peninsula, because this government is really trying to have this achieved, but among the 4 points, this is the point where they didn't make a lot of progress, because of the sanctions that is placed on North Korea. We can make agreements, we cannot follow through. And I personally believe, as long as there is a meaningful progress on North Korea giving up nuclear weapons, we shouldn't go into economic cooperation very easily, by the way, giving money to North Korea. That's my personal view. This is the policy-making structure. We have President, National Security Council, comprising security-focused ministers and standing committees. So this picture is about the National Security Council that was taken in the bunker of the National Security Office at which I worked. And when something happened, like missile launch or nuclear test by North Korea, we always get together in the underground bunker. So that's the bunker. And this is an open official photo. So deep dive, North Korean nuclear threat. Too late to tame. Let's talk about 91, 94, 2005, 2012, 2018. This is the years in which we had important agreements with North Korea. 2018, still to be seen. 1991, 2 agreements. Number 1, South and North Korea agreed on inter-Korean denuclearization declaration, saying both Koreas will renounce the right to possess nuclear weapons. Second agreement is between North Korea and IAEA, International Agency for Atomic Energy Agency, rather. And they agreed that North Korea will allow IAEA inspectors to come in and inspect whether there is any cheating in North Korea. And there was a cheating, and that was the beginning of all troubles. 94, United States, North Korea agreed framework. So U.S. went into bilateral negotiations and agreed on this agreement called agreed framework, basically saying that North Korea will allow everything in return, and United States, Japan, and my country will build a nuclear reactor, nuclear power plant in North Korea, as well as providing North Korea with heavy fuel oil. Right, so that's what the agreement, and it was broke off because U.S. Discovered a uranium enrichment program in North Korea. That's a violation of the agreement. And North Korea, of course, had different story. So 2005, meaning that these bilateral negotiations are no more. And President Bush said that to China, Chinese President Jiang Zemin, that why don't you chair some meetings for this? And sixth party was born: South and North Korea, US, China, Japan, and Russia. And in 2003, and 2 years of acrimonious discussions, and finally, September 2005, we had such rather good agreement. And also say that North Korea will give up nuclear weapons and all existing nuclear programs. And in return, the US and Japan promised to establish relations with North Korea. In return, an international community will come up with some kind of economic cooperation package, and so on and so forth. And it didn't work again. In 2012, going back to bilateral, United States and North Korea made an agreement. It's a small-scale agreement. It's not about the whole nuclear weapons. Just agreed. North Korea just agreed not to test nuclear weapons and not to test long-range missiles. But only 2 weeks later, North Korea announced the satellite launch plan. And satellite, to us, means long-range missiles. So the deal only lasted about maybe 2 weeks. And now another attempt at negotiation this time. And you know what happened. Let's see what happens. And Singapore, I'm a bit critical of Singapore. And why? Because the agreement was too short, nothing really much. It doesn't contain Kim Jong-un's promise to give up nuclear weapons. It just said they will work for a denuclearization of the whole Korean peninsula. And that's, I think, different things. And then they didn't agree on the subsequent working level negotiations. That's why, again, last night, this Pompeo-Kim Yong-chol meeting, fifth time, not lucky, but didn't happen. So they are going to talk about this. And because of all this, I'm wary of leaders coming in first and trying to do something. Sometimes can work the magic, but usually it's not very meticulous. So things happen. What now? We'll have to keep our fingers crossed and see what happens. And basically, as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said some years ago, North Korea is a problem only with lousy options. So it's a choice between bad, really bad, less bad, and least bad. And good choice hardly comes by. And as far as my country is concerned, I strongly believe that we have to look for least bad options. And to me, that is not recognize North Korea's nuclear weapons, strongly pressure North Korea to give up nuclear weapons. While that happens, the U.S. military option should be on the shelf, not on the table. That's what I think, basically. And for that to happen, we'll have to keep our sanctions intact. So, as I said, first picture is about 1991. The second picture is 1994, and Ambassador Bob Gallucci is signing the bilateral agreement in 1994. And then Ambassador Gallucci, after 24 years, became like this. the third picture on the right. Right. And then bottom, the first picture is 2005 agreement, six-party talks, 2012, and finally, Singapore. Inter-Korean relations, we had this year Panmunjom Declaration, 27th day of April. And the first picture showing the two signatures is about the Panmunjom Declaration. And when you look at the signatures, you find it rather interesting, especially the left one, that's Kim Jong-un's signature, is going up and right. It's very interesting. And Pyongyang Declaration in September, and actually the middle right, President Moon and Chairman Kim Jong-un is showing the Pyongyang Declaration. And of course, President Trump famously showed the letter from Kim Jong-un in the top right picture. And gentleman standing beside is Vice Chairman Kim Yong-chol, who had planned to meet with Mike Pompeo today and canceled. And then the bottom right picture is our defense minister and North Korean defense minister showing the military agreement. And I have some troubles about the agreement because I believe that this really is getting ahead too fast while nuclear issue is not making progress. That's my personal belief. And then Kim Jong-un promised to visit South Korea this year. And President Moon said if Kim Jong-un visits, perhaps he will invite him to the highest mountain in South Korea, that is Mount Halla in Jeju Island, in return for Kim Jong-un's favor to invite President Moon to the highest mountain on the whole Korean peninsula, that's Mount Baekdo, in September. Now, the building peace on the Korean peninsula is an important issue, and that's reported in Korean press so many times. If you're interested in Korean affairs, you will follow this. But let's look at what happened. The first picture is 1953. So the commander of the UN forces and the commander of the North Korean forces are signing armistice agreement. Armistice is basically saying that we stop shooting at each other. And that doesn't take leaders of the country to sign the agreement. It suffices that only military commanders and field commanders sign the agreements. They signed it. And then in that agreement, they said, well, we are going to have the big meeting and conclude the peace agreement. So next year, in 1954 in Geneva, the second picture, South Korea, North Korea, United States, 16 countries who sent troops on our side, and China all got together and tried to do something, and very quickly they found that there is no ground for negotiations. They dispersed. And that's where the famous instance of United States Secretary of State refusing to shake hands with Chinese Foreign Minister Zhou Enlai at the time. I don't think that's a very good way to behave as a diplomat. Perhaps even if you're enemies, I think it's better to shake hands, but this is the time of the Cold War, so animosity was very high. So US Secretary of State probably thinking that this shaking hands feature isn't very good back in the United States, so decided to refuse to shake hands. And times have changed, so third picture, everybody shake hands. And this is the four-party talks. What happened was that, so 1954, and after 40-something years later, in 1996, South Korea and United States proposed talks with North Korea to talk about establishing and concluding peace agreement. And after 6 months or so, they finally agreed. So in Geneva, four parties, South and North Korea, United States and China, met for 5 times for about 2 years, but nothing really happened. So that was the end of the story. And the morals of this story is that peace agreement is such a difficult thing to do unless we really have a peace and mutual trust among the parties. So unless that doesn't exist, it's difficult to conclude peace treaty. And secondly, peace is such a strange word. So it means something to some people, it means other things to other people. So as a professional diplomat, the word peace always gives me chills in my spine, because until I find out what it means, what they mean by saying peace, I'll be in a very cautious mode. So peace, in the name of peace, many terrible things happen too. So peace is a strange thing. So let's talk about Northeast Asia. My government would like to keep our alliance with the United States strong. It's getting rather challenging to make it happen because of President Trump's notions about the alliance. I have already spoken about it. We had midterm elections. Nothing much has changed. So now House is Democratic and Senate continues to be Republican. President Trump will have a little more troubles getting his ways in the House, but House cannot really dictate foreign policy. So when it comes to foreign policies, nothing much will be changed, I think. North Korea policy coordination, some people say that basic notions of North Korea policies of Washington and Seoul are different. Let's see what happens. And President Trump decided to stop exercises, but we need to keep our readiness, and militaries are there to be ready for eventualities. So this is rather challenging too. Wartime OPCON transfer, and in the latest meeting, military meeting, US and my country actually had an agreement. I think it's a good agreement. So let's see what happens. And we have revised free trade agreement, the second, the bottom left picture, and that was done rather well. So two leaders are rather happy about it, right? So that's good. But the middle picture and top right picture is about the burden sharing negotiations. So it's about how to share costs of US military stationed in my country. Now the US is coming up with a very, very different notion about these negotiations. It has become very tough negotiations, and that is why some of the people of my country are protesting against the United States. China. Restore and strengthen relations with China after THAAD. THAAD actually was a terrible blow to the relationship, and we have to restore the relations to our mutual benefit. And things happened the way that was wrapped up by 3 no's, bottom right. 3 no's meaning no more THAAD, and no, my country not joining the US missile defense, and finally, my country not joining US, Japan, South Korea trilateral alliance. Well, these are current policies of my government. Having said that, I believe in having options. So closing down options is not good to me. Always keeping your options open, and having as many options as possible is a good diplomacy. So close down options you might need 10 years down the road. For the sake of this, I don't think it's very good, and also my personal opinion. So we need to do all this with China, and I really support having stronger relations between Korea and China. Japan. First 2 pictures show the conflict between our two, not conflict is a strong word, differences between our two countries. One is about the comfort women, Korean comfort women victims protesting. The second one, the ultra-right Japanese people protesting in Tokyo. I was in Tokyo, believe me, I saw this every week. And then the third picture is what I like most. It's from the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. The second is Kodaira, a Japanese speed skater. Right, Lee Sang-hwa, a Korean speed skater. Actually, Kodaira beat Lee Sang-hwa, so Kodaira gold medal, Lee Sang-hwa silver. But in spite of that, they are such close friends. And Kodaira came up to Lee Sang-hwa and comforted her after the race. And it was reported so widely in Japan and also in Korea. And I like this very, very much. Why? Because we have so many problems with Japan, and most of them going back to the colonial times from 1910 to 1945. My government's position, this annexation treaty from the beginning is illegal. Japanese government position, it was legal at the time. So it's implacable, unbridgeable gap. So this will remain. But at the same time, our young people are enjoying each other's cultures. There are so many izakayas in Seoul, young people frequent. There are so many Korean restaurants in Japan, especially in New Okubo Street. It's a Koreatown, and there are so many Japanese young boys and girls coming every day, especially during the weekends. I saw that. So that's happening too. And I hope that the last picture will define our relationships. Russia. And I hope that we will be able to realize promises in ROK-Russia relations. Russia, when they established relations back in 1990, they had high hopes. I'm talking my viewpoints here. Russia is both Europe and Asia, right? And in Europe, most of the population lives. And Asia is so sparsely populated. And in Russia, from the Ural Mountains and east all the way to maritime provinces, they have like maybe tens of millions of people, maybe 30 million, maybe 20 million, something like that. The whole population of Russia, I think, is 150 million. So I think between 20 and 30 million. And you have China, you have Korea, you have Japan. We have, Japan has, 150 million. China, 1.2 billion. And South and North Korea come together, 80 million. So Russia wanted to have some investments and some contribution from these countries for the development of Russian maritime provinces, Vladivostok, Irkutsk, all those provinces. And Russia, I believe, actually is most comfortable with investment from my country because we are not big powers. We have no designs on Russian Far East. So we are the perfect partner. But because my country is so busy trying to deal with challenges from North Korea, we didn't actually meet these expectations from Russia. That is partly why Russia was a little disappointed and somewhat frustrated. And I hope that we'll be able to meet our mutual expectations because this is in mutual interest. And for that to happen, of course, we'll have to take care of North Korean challenges and other more immediate challenges. Beyond North Korea, Northeast Asia and global, New Southern Policy, ASEAN India, it's Moon Jae-in government's hallmark foreign policy. So President Moon visited India, President Moon visited Vietnam, the Philippines. He will visit Philippines, and what else? A couple of other ASEAN countries. And this is important, but this is economically focused. So in that sense, it is not the same as a United States Indo-Pacific strategic concept, which is more strategic and military rather than economic. New Northern Policy, it's in the Cheongwade website, but it's being developed, so nothing much happened as yet. But I'm sure that President Moon will visit not only Russia, but also our traditional and friendly countries like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and those countries and Mongolia. So we'll be able to develop this part of the policies, but so far, nothing much has happened as yet. And Europe, Latin America, Middle East, and Africa, and this is the focus. and global agenda. This is the focus according to government policy book. And 3P ODA, why 3P? I found out it's people, peace, and mutual prosperity. That's 3P. And beyond Northeast Asia, we have issues. It's not from the government official book, it's from me. So in the Pacific, One Belt, One Road, as I said, my government's preference is to develop cooperation with China and also with the United States. But when these two countries clash with each other, then countries will have to make a choice. And my government choice will be made by the current government. So we'll have to see. I just like to point out that if USA and China is going like this, perhaps many countries will be forced to a position to make a decision that they don't want to make. South China Sea is important for us because we are completely dependent upon the outside sources of fossil fuel energy. So over 90% of our oil comes through South China Sea, and virtually 100% of our natural gas comes through South China Sea. And so this is one of our vital sea lengths and one of our vital interests. So far, we weren't able to reach out and do something about it, but when time comes, and my country will be an active player in this part of the world. East Asia Summit, APEC, ASEM, FAIRLAC. FAIRLAC is a summit ministerial meeting between East Asia and Latin America. So you see the meetings multiply. And from time to time, we'll have to weed them out. So East Asia Summit, APEC, actually, I think redundancies rather. So East Asia, and APEC is there. And logically, I would think that China would prefer East Asia Summit because East Asia Summit doesn't have representative from Taiwan, while APEC has Taiwan representatives. So naturally, East Asia Summit should be China's preference, but actually it is not the case in reality. China prefers not to be too active in East Asia Summit, and why, they wouldn't tell us, so I'll tell my reasons, my personal thinking, that is, China believes that ASEAN, when it comes to ASEAN, they prefer to have bilateral relations and bilateral negotiation with ASEAN nations or ASEAN as a whole. But they don't really like having countries outside ASEAN coming in. So for example, when it comes to the issue of South China Sea, China's standard position, and this is open and public, is that we will deal with the problem between China and ASEAN nations. And we oppose outside countries coming in and making troubles. And I'm sure that means United States. Human rights, climate change, refugees, post-Ban Ki-moon multilateral diplomacy, value-driven diplomacy. This is a big question for every country. So every country will pursue national interests. So if you say that your foreign policy is pursuing national interests, doesn't mean anything. I mean, it doesn't impress anybody. Every country is doing that. But some countries actually are practicing a value-driven diplomacy. So this is our value. For example, Northern European countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, these countries are spending a much more money relative to their economic size to the causes of, say, refugees and the food assistance to countries in hunger and a couple of other humanitarian issues. So when somebody says, he's from or she's from Sweden, that usually, I conjure up that image. I mean, Sweden, a a country really helping us. The countries in need, in trouble, in conflict, so they help refugees. They are sending food. They are sending medicines. So when something happens in the world, usually the international organizations rush to like Stockholm or Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, these countries, primary donors for asking for money. I hope that my country, not quite advanced economies, and then we also divided. We're going to pay huge costs for both division and unification, but one day we'll become a country with a certain image. So when I say Korea, you may conjure up some image, I hope positive image, like countries which are over here, compassionate, generous, respecting rule of law, some values, right? Proactive middle power, globally focused, not resigned to our geopolitical fate, isolated, closed, right? So I hope that happens someday. But we have come a long way in such a short time, so we have a way to go before we get there. So first picture, 1945, obviously, the year that we became independent we were always independent. There was a brief lack of independence for 35 years rather, and we became independent again in 1945, and people are very happy, but very poor. 1953, at the end of the Korean War, also very, very poor, was like that. 1973, and that was the picture I dug up from 1973. Why 1973? Because 1973 was the year when my country became richer than North Korea. So in other words, after the end of the Korean War, for 20 long years, North Korea was actually richer than South Korea. And at that time, North Korea was saying to us that let's have talks, let's open our borders, let our peoples choose where they want to live. They were very confident, right? 1973, finally, we caught up. So this is a picture. And this is a very pretty schoolgirl is in a classroom, not on the streets. I'm very happy about it. And 1973, I was high teens. So in other words, for almost 20 years, I lived in a time when North Korea was richer and more powerful than my country. So I know the threat from North Korea, not only military threat, but threat of monopolizing the whole legitimacy over the Korean people, because they say, it's about how you make your people happier. And we believe that we make our people happier than the people in South Korea. And that is also partly why from 1959, and this is not in the slide, from 1959 up until 1984, almost 100,000 Korean people living permanently in Japan at the time decided to go to, not South Korea, but to North Korea. So 100,000 out of 600,000, or 700,000 rather, decided to move from Japan to North Korea, thinking this is the fatherland. Also, this is a country or half with a better promise, North Korea. And when you think now, this is hardly believable, but at that time, it was perfectly credible. I vehemently oppose the Japanese Red Cross decision to allow this happen. But at the same time, they made their own choices and decided to go to North Korea. Another anecdotal story. Well, if that didn't happen, meaning these people went to North Korea in 1960s, if that had not happened, and Kim Jong-un, the current North Korean leader, would not have been born. Because Kim Jong-un's mother originally came from Japan. So this migration happened, and that is why Kim Jong-un was born. And her mother's name is Go Young-hee, and she was actually a dancer in one of the most famous North Korean musical groups, and everybody knows it. But actually, this name Go Young-hee is not yet announced in North Korea. Last year, North Korean government said that our great leader's mother is such a patriotic woman and actually mother of the whole country. But they didn't announce the name because these Japanese, so these immigrants from Japan, immigrants is not a good word, but Koreans coming from Japan to North Korea have been regarded as potentially disloyal to the regime. And they are practically at the bottom of the social ladder, along with the people who go to church, along with the people whose relatives and brothers and sisters come down to South Korea, like my father and mother. And so these people are regarded not completely loyal to the regime, and these people hardly become members of the Labor Party in North Korea. And unless you become a member of the Labor Party in North Korea, you don't get up or you don't get ahead. So yeah, that's another story. So finally, I hope that Korea, as they have developed so fast in such a short span of time, and also became a full-fledged democracy in the process. I am very proud of that achievement, but I'm also conscious that because of this such a fast-paced development, there are rooms to be improved on. There are rooms in my country. There are gaps to be filled. There are rooms to be improved. Something important. We have to work harder. And some aspects I'm very pleased with. Our NGO communities are very vocal about the issues of refugees, about the issues of workers coming from third countries. They are very, very vocal. And there are so many institutes and so many like daycare centers and medical services they are providing. So these people of my country are doing a good work. I hope that this will expand to the whole population of my country, for example. And the rule of law, we went through a very difficult times of authoritarianism. It's an understatement. So during those times, pro-democracy activists are patriots. And I believe that too. And I believe that now. But in that process, actually these laws promulgated by the authoritarian government, and also laws promulgated by the Japanese colonial government are not good, right? So this notion took root in the minds of my people. And this, even though now we have democracies, and the laws are made by the people they elect, so we should observe the law, and rule of law will have to prevail the day, but still not fair. So many people go out to the streets and try to make laws there. and I don't think it's good. So it takes time. It takes time. Such a spectacular development, still ways to go. I hope that you spend time in my country, getting to know our people, getting to know our culture and history, and getting to know the accomplishments and achievements, and also getting to know the shortcomings and the deficiencies that still surely exist in my country. I hope that you'll have the full knowledge and hopefully some affection of my country and my people when you leave Korea. And thank you very much. Then I will talk briefly about the things that I thought I would like to talk and didn't have time. Well, let's look at this map again. So when you look at the top left picture, you have all different colors of lines coming from Beijing all the way to Europe, right? So this is One Belt, One Road initiative from China. And China is actually very serious about this initiative. I chose to talk about this a little more because on a global scale, rise of China, I believe, is the biggest event and biggest factor affecting the whole security dimension or security world of the on a global scale. And as I said, their mantra was the hiding the light of sword and put your sword in the scabbard and wait for the time to put out your sword, and until that time comes, you will want to grow and cultivate your power, economic power and military power and other powers. So that has been the policy mantra from early 1970s up until these days. So almost 3 or 4 decades. And that was the words given by Deng Xiaoping. And when China decided to take part in the Korean War in 1950s, there were fierce debate about the wisdom of sending the troops into the Korean Peninsula, because it was only in 1949 that China, or People's Republic of China, gained the control of the whole continent, driving the Kuomintang to the island of Taiwan. And the war broke out in 1950, only less than 1 year following that event. And then they were supposed to fight against the mighty Americans on the Korean Peninsula. So, in other words, many of the Chinese generals actually opposed sending the troops to the Korean Peninsula in October 1950. But Mao Zedong made this important decision, I think from a broader political perspective. There are all sorts of reasons given, the official and otherwise, but I believe that Mao Zedong basically thought that if Chinese troops do not oppose Americans, and let North Korea completely taken over by South Korea and the American troops, that will embolden the President Truman and American administration, and that will lead to Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan asking Washington to do some aggressive plans about China. So in other words, Mao Zedong believed it's better to fight on the Korean peninsula than fight again in mainland China against the Americans and the Kuomintang army. And this is very important, and this is how probably leaders think when they make important strategic decisions, because same logic is happening again and again. So when you take up this kind of question, you'll have to come from their own domestic focused thinkings to interpret their decisions. So militarily speaking, it was, I think, a success and disaster for Chinese troops. Success because Chinese troops of almost 300,000 sneaked into the Korean peninsula, because Korea peninsula have this high mountain range coming across from the north to the south. So between north and south, we used to have a lot of activities and exchanges, but east to west, not much. These Chinese troops only walked at night, only marched at night, and just hiding and sleeping during the day when American surveillance, the planes can fly. So General MacArthur was completely surprised. American troops were surrounded, both northeastern part of the peninsula and northwestern part of the peninsula. And northwest, I'm talking about US Marines, and Marines are combat hardened, very brave soldiers. There were so many casualties that when I went to the United States, there were particular kind of Marine veterans group called themselves Joshin Few. So Joshin is the name of the reservoir, huge reservoir, man-made lake in northeastern part of the peninsula. And it's called Jangjeon in Korean language. But at that time, Korean language map wasn't available. So American troops used Japanese map. It called Joshin in Japanese language. And few, obviously there were so many casualties, only few survived. So Joshin few. So that experience was haunted, I think, the Chinese leaders. Although it was probably necessary from Chinese viewpoints to come in the 1950s, but so many casualties, Chinese troops weren't ready to match this firepower of the American troops. So after that, Chinese became not aggressive. And then Deng Xiaoping made it official policy by saying that you'll have to hide the light of sword in the scabbard from the moon. And then now the new leader came in, and finally China is being assertive again. And One Belt, One Road initiative is a huge initiative, isn't it? From Asia to Europe, encompassing the seas and lands. And they are investing money. And they back their policies with financial resources. And this, in the international world, if there is an action, there usually is a reaction. So reaction is the right top picture, the picture of Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific is colored in blue. Actually, for an average Korean, the name Indo-Pacific they heard just now, after President Trump made it official policy of the United States and renamed Asia Pacific Command in Hawaii to a Indo-Pacific Command. But I heard it well before that when I was in Australia. When I visited Perth, the western part of Australia, they already talked about Indo-Pacific. They talked about Perth being hub of the Indo-Pacific. And Japan took it up. So for several years, Japan said Indo-Pacific is a very good and useful strategic concept. And now the President Trump took it up. It became official. And these two visions, if or unless, these two visions, unless US and China work it out, would lead to or might lead to a conflict. If it should lead to conflict, it's a conflict between United States and China, affecting all the countries I think represented here. So this is everybody's business. And these two visions do not necessarily collide with each other. But if that is to happen, I think a lot of strategic visions and statesmanship, global and international statesmanship, will have to come into play. And people talk about Thucydides' trap. The Thucydides is an ancient Greek historian who wrote the history of the War of the Peloponnesian War, rather. And that's way, way back. And the theory is that a rising power will inevitably militarily clash with a current power. And as a student of international politics myself, I really hope that we can find a better way for the benefit of the United States and China and Korea, Japan, Russia, Southeast Asian nations, Australia, and all other nations. I do hope that these two leaders and these two countries will find a way and strengthen strategic communications. Otherwise, these two visions will collide, and the battleground will be made from all these affected blue-collared areas, right? So I talked about Korea's international security policy this morning, but this was about Korea. I want to leave the impression that not only Korean Peninsula is important, but these bigger questions are actually important to you and are actually important to Korea. But because Korea was so preoccupied with immediate challenges emanating from North Korea, we are not active enough in those questions. For example, Korean Navy sent one of our the naval ships all the way to the seas off the coast of Somalia, at the Horn of Africa. When you see the map here, right map, or left map too, you see India, you see Arabian Peninsula, and left of that is a sharp horn, right? That's where Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti are located. And off these coasts, there are many pirates and preying on commercial ships. So that's why Korean Navy decided to send out ship to join NATO operations to drive away pirates. But we didn't send any ship to South China Sea. And that's why I'm saying that all of us, including my country, should be more active, should voice our opinions so that this fatalistic doomsday vision of clash between the two titans will not materialize. So I hope that you will take the time after this lecture to take a look at these maps and perhaps look up some newspaper, some articles, and think about this and how these affect your own countries. And the good materials I like to recommend to you is from the Shangri-La conference this year, held in Singapore, and the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, made a speech that really represented U.S. position about these questions. And Chinese retort was also worth reading. So I hope that you'll take a look at them and get close to the issues that I, all my life, have been dealing with. And so I like to end here. If there is any question now, I'll take it. And if not, then, well, this is a very, how can I put it, a very serious subject and can be a very boring subject. Not very exciting and not really, you don't really feel close to you about those issues. And that's logical. And that happens. And that happens to me too from time to time. But I thank you for your indulgence in listening to me this morning. And I hope that you will get interested a little more about these issues, because these issues are like air. So when you have air, you have no problems. When you find yourself in Mars, you now you understand that air is important, and security is like that. When things are good, it's being taken care of, you don't have to worry about that. But things are not good and goings get rough, then this becomes a number one important issue to all of you. And so I hope that you take that in mind. And again, thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening this morning. Thank you.